Federal agencies took significant steps forward over the past 2 years to better support civil servants. But agencies still face many challenges in how to modernize the way they attract, train, and retain talent to meet the new demands and expectations of the American public. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and here to talk about that is Erica Ford, Principal People Advisory Services at Ernst & Young. Erica, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Wyatt. Thanks so much for having me.
So let's start by framing kind of a baseline here. Federal agencies have been given a variety of new authorities and tools for hiring the talent they need. But what are you hearing from your federal customers about how helpful those initiatives have been, and what challenges are they still facing?
You know, it's been great. OPM recognizing, that flexibility is needed given just the competition for talent, people making new decisions based on the impacts, the aftermath of what's happened with COVID and that kind of thing. And so the competition for talent is really fierce. And so OPM released late last year a new set of hiring authorities. And the hiring authorities, it was a pretty long list. But they released it as a way to just say, here are more options that you have available to you, and things that you can explore. You know, generally what I'm hearing from clients is kind of easier going with the ones that you know well, and that are, the ones that are that seem to be more intuitive and that have always been, the go-tos. But really, there's a lot of other things that you can do around, like emergency appointments for 30 days. There's all different kinds of things that you can do. But it takes a lot of education and understanding about how to use those things. And so some of what we're hearing is around just, there's a willingness to reevaluate hiring processes. There's a willingness to consider other ways to go about doing this hiring, for sure. But it's intimidating because there's all these other all these other options. And it's also intimidating because you have to find the time and space to figure out what's right for your organization. And so that is really it, interest, and some exploration, but really wanting that additional help. And we've been seeing some really interesting things where organizations are actually doing proactive analysis of their hiring processes, and eventually that factors in these other hiring authorities that they can actually use, but it takes time and investment. And so that's another piece that can be a little intimidating because you still have the mission that you have to serve every day while you're trying to do those things that will improve your ability to get that talent in the door.
Well, we're hearing a lot about how the government needs to modernize its systems, but we also hear that they really need to also modernize the civil service workforce. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on what does that mean and what does that look like?
I'm a daughter of civil service servants. My father was an Army intelligence officer and a pilot, lived all over the world in the States with him. My mother works for Veterans Affairs. The reason why I give that caveat is that I'm a real believer in civil service. And there's just a tremendous, it has played such a personal role in my life, and being able to support, the government and these amazing folks that are committed to public service has been such an honor. The reason why I give you that caveat is that a lot of times when you start talking about civil service modernization, and sometimes people throw around the word reform, you start thinking about, oh, are we talking about losing people? Are we talking about, shifting people and bringing in more technology and not needing more people? It's really not that. It's really around this idea of how do you get your workforce to really focus on the right things, given everything that we've learned, particularly in the last 2 to 3 years. And in addition to that, how do you really make sure that you can get talent for those really hard to find kind of roles, especially when it can be challenging when you know that you can't pay what a Google or an Amazon pays. And then also just sometimes the perception around, government service can be boring. And we all know that it is anything but. There's so much opportunity to innovate. So when we talk about civil service modernization, part of it is helping put out the story in terms of what is government really doing? What is government pushing? What are they thinking ahead on? And what kind of opportunity comes with that from technology enablement, thinking of new and innovative ways to do things. And when you think about that, it brings to the question of, well, how do you get, how do you create a civil service that is not only focused on the right things, but you're getting the right talent in the door? And so, going back to what I said, I grew up, as a person who got the benefits of parents who worked in, civil service. There's so much that the federal government does as an incredible employer. So while they may not necessarily, have some of the financial opportunities that you might see at a Google, but what we're seeing now is people thinking bigger about how do they tell their total reward story in terms of compensation. It's not just about what you get paid, it's also about your benefits package, the opportunity for learning, the kinds of people you have exposure to, the kind of projects that you'll have exposure to. So we've seen a lot of folks that are now doubling down and looking at compensation, looking at learning models and rethinking, career levels so that they can create some more opportunity to have upward mobility and roles, that kind of thing. How do you figure out ways where you can bring in more technology that will allow folks to, get the benefits from like robotics and all of that, so they can use that capacity and that brain power to put their time in other places. And all of that can be really, really cool and sound really, really awesome. But that also requires some investment from a change management perspective, because if you've had folks who have been dedicated and working in their roles for some time and they've gotten used to the way you do certain things, there is an emotional process of getting ready for modernization and all that comes with it. And so you can never underestimate that. And so really allowing, as you think about the things you can change and bring about to modernize the workforce, how do you really take care of people and do it in a way that's empathetic, that creates opportunity, and that, takes the time that they need in order to, adopt some of these new ways of thinking, and that kind of thing. I mean, one of the things that's been most interesting to see just how, there's been so many things with the pandemic that have, been hurtful and have been a lot for us to kind of take on. But some of the things that have come out of it is that you've seen folks that, were saying, never, ever will I ever let anyone on my team work from home. And now really seeing the benefits of it because of, the circumstances demanded it. And now I was on a call, yesterday with one of the wonderful folks that I work with, the chief technology officer. And he was like, I don't ever want to lose the productivity that we've gained as a result of these last 2 years. So it's such an interesting time, but those are some of the elements when we talk about civil service modernization and what you can do that's really, really exciting, but just thinking about the people along the way and not forgetting to invest that time to make sure they're okay.
As we've certainly seen a lot of changes and learned a lot of lessons over these last 2 years.
For
I'd,
sure.
I'd be interested, so shifting perspectives a little bit, how does that change the way government agencies need to think about themselves as an employer, and perhaps the way they attract and manage talent in light of all we've been through?
That goes back to what we were talking about, earlier in terms of, all the wonderful things and the kind of employer that the federal government can be. There's so much interesting talent that is out there that's been previously untapped. And being an employer that is thinking about, okay, what is my brand as an employer? Like, what makes it cool? What makes it exciting to work for Veterans Affairs or Consumer Finance Protection Bureau or, the Department of Defense? What are the things that are cool, right? And so a lot of what we're seeing is conversations, and we're having a lot of conversation, folks, is like, how do you rethink? How do you reposition yourself and what it means to be a public servant? It is undeniable the role that government can play, and the way that we live and breathe. So how can you rethink it? So some of the ways that you rethink it are your compensation models, and you think about your rewards packages and finding new ways that you can, create opportunity and access to new knowledge. But then also when you think about, as an employer, how do you create folks that really create the opportunity to have a workforce that looks like America? So there's a lot of opportunity around if you want to be an employer that really leans into those things, bringing in folks that are from the neurodiverse community that are neurodiverse, and tapping into those talents and bringing them in for a whole wide range of roles, and being an employer that is really invested in bringing that kind of talent into your organization, and like talking about it. There's other things that you can do as an employer. I think it's very hard because, especially in our mission driven way that we work, you don't get to tell your story as much, and really ground it in real people, and that kind of thing. One of the things that makes people want to work with you is the more interaction that they've had with you, whether it's from the recruiting process. The more interactions you have during the recruiting process, the higher chance the person will come, if you want them. And then the other part of it too is just this idea of building these longer term relationships with people over time. So one of the things that we've talked about with a lot of organizations, how can you tap into pools earlier? There's an interesting organization called Coding It Forward. And one of the things that they do is that they're all comprised of these, of folks from schools like Harvard and Stanford and that kind of thing. And they're all folks that are interested in technology, but they're interested in doing it in civil service and not necessarily running to Amazon, which is a great employer. So please don't misunderstand. I think, wait for my Amazon packages now. So, they're a great employer and they do some really, really cool things. But, but there's also this group of folks that have those skills that also, want to go into civil service. So places like Coding It Forward is a way that you can find those talents and bring them to the federal government through internships and other kinds of opportunities for early employment. And, and that's another way to talk about your mission and what you do with a whole different group of people early in their working life, which is really, really incredible. And I think the generational impact, whether or not they stay in government forever or not, is really important to really respect what government can do. So I think that's pretty awesome. So just a few thoughts.
And then lastly, it's no secret government agencies have invariably had a difficult time matching a private sector compensation package, especially for more technical jobs. What other last thoughts do you have on how they can, if not necessarily level the playing field, compete effectively on the playing field?
Tell the story, and that goes back to it. Make that investment in getting the folks, when you're sending people out to do recruiting and stuff, there are lots of dynamic ways that you can source for talent. And one of your biggest gifts that you can, your biggest assets in sourcing that talent, are using the people that work with you now to really creating incentives and enthusiasm for them to bring their networks to the organization. So that's a piece, because telling that story is really important. Definitely, again, we've come back to that theme about telling the whole story about what you do in terms of taking care of that person, in addition to just what their paycheck is. That's super, super important. And the other piece too is just think about how the relationship building with candidates over time. Because when you start telling that story and getting people to imprint on your mission, it's really important. It is one of the things that keeps folks interested. And so I think sometimes folks can think, okay, well, I went to the job fair, I gave the presentation and that kind of thing. But what comes from that are people who follow up, who want to talk, and there's not enough minutes in the day, but figuring out how, at a grassroots level, how to tell your story, that's really the thing that creates that pipeline of talent. And figuring out a way to, how can you do that in a way where you can still do what you got to do to deliver on your mission on a day-to-day basis, but your organization has the capacity to have the right people out and about at the job fairs, participating in the interviews. And, that's really important. The last thing I'll say too is we're also seeing some organizations trying to push how quickly they can close offers. Sometimes you'll talk to a candidate and you may, the sooner you can close, the better. And so one of the things we've seen folks start talking about is how can you go through the steps of hiring more quickly to include maybe even doing same day conditional offers if you have a process that allows for that. So those kinds of things where you can close very quickly with folks and move fast, because the talent these days, there's so many opportunity. So the more you drag it out, the less of a chance you're really going to have time to secure that talent. And while you got them, you want to keep them hooked, because working for you all and working for public sector is such a great opportunity.
Absolutely. All great points. Really appreciate that. So Erica Ford, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to share your insights on ways federal agencies can indeed modernize the civil workforce and clearly can work harder to attract and retain great talent.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks again for the opportunity. And it's wonderful to hear your silky voice, Wyatt, and I just appreciate the time.
Thank you.